All right, welcome back, football fans, to another episode of Gridiron Legends. Today we're going to continue our review of the Hall of Fame class of 1967. So stick around and join me as we dig into the past with our spotlight on one of the most innovative coaches in NFL history, the legendary Paul Brown. Okay, today we're going to take a look at Paul Brown. He was inducted in the class of 1967 as a head coach. He won 8 league championships over 17 seasons in the NFL, and he ended up with a record of 167, 53, and 8. So let's go ahead and dig into his bio and see what we can learn from that. Paul Brown, perhaps more than any other person, is responsible for making pro football coaching the exact science it is today. When he organized the Cleveland Browns in the new All-America Football Conference in 1946, he started doing things that no other pro coach had tried. Brown had a background of exceptional success as a high school, college, and military service coach when he was given his first pro assignment with the new Cleveland team. Immediately, he hired a full-time staff on a year-round basis, and he instituted a system for scouting college talent on a scale never before imagined by other pro teams. In his handling of his team, he became the first to use intelligence tests as a hint to a player's learning potential, use notebooks and classroom techniques extensively, set up complete film clip statistical studies, and grade his own players based on film study. Brown, always a firm disciplinarian, was the first coach to keep his players together at a hotel the night before a home game as well as a road game. From the strategic standpoint, he started the practice of calling plays from the sideline by utilizing alternating guards as messengers. He developed detailed pass patterns for the offense that were designed to pick holes in the defense. But then he devoted his efforts to perfecting the kind of defense that could counteract a pattern passing attack. Brown built a pro football dynasty in Cleveland, posting a 167, 53, and 8 record, 4 AAFC titles, 3 NFL crowns, and only 1 losing season in 17 years. In the 4 seasons the Browns operated in the AAFC, they lost just 4 games. When the Browns joined the NFL in 1950, they continued their winning ways, playing in the next 6 championship games and winning the title in 1950, 54, and 55. Okay, let's do some research here and see what else we can find out about Paul Brown. Paul Brown was born in 1908. He has a pretty storied history in coaching, so I'm going to try to summarize a lot of his high school and college coaching career. Brown started coaching at Severn High School in 1931 before becoming the head football coach at Massillon Washington High School in Massillon, Ohio, at the young age of 24. The year before Brown arrived, the Tigers finished with a 2-6-2 record. And then with Brown as the head coach, the Tigers teams lost only 10 games in 11 seasons. During his 9 years at Massillon, Brown invented the playbook, a detailed listing of formations and set plays, and he tested his players on their knowledge of it. He also originated the practice of sending in plays to his quarterback from the sideline using hand signals. Brown's success at Massillon raised his profile in Ohio as the miracle man of Massillon. He was then hired at Ohio State, where he immediately began to institute his rigorous system, and players were drilled and quizzed and conditioned his players to emphasize quickness, adopting the 40-yard dash as a measure of speed because that was the distance players needed to run to cover a punt. In Brown's first year, the Buckeyes won 6 of 8 games. Their only loss was to Northwestern University and its star tailback, Otto Graham. The 1942 team was the first composed mainly of players handpicked by Brown, including Bill Willis, Dante Lavelli, and star halfback Les Horvath. The Buckeyes won the Western Conference and claimed their first ever national title after finishing the season at the top of the AP poll. Now, by the time Brown arrived in Cleveland, the team had signed a number of players to its roster, including quarterback Otto Graham, whose Northwestern squad had beaten the Buckeyes in 1941. Many of the players came from Ohio State, Great Lakes, and Massillon teams that Brown coached. Lou Groza, a place kicker and tackle, played for Brown at Ohio State before the war intervened. Receiver Dante Lavelli was a sophomore on Ohio State's championship-winning team in 1942. Bill Willis, a defensive lineman whom Brown coached at Ohio State, and Marion Motley, a running back who grew up in Canton and played for Brown at Great Lakes, became 2 of the first black athletes to play professional football when they joined the team in 1946. Other signings included receiver Max Speedy, center Frank Gatsky, and back Edgar Special Delivery Jones. Brown brought in assistants including Blanton Collier, who had been stationed at Great Lakes and met Brown at the Blue Jackets practices. Okay, so this is kind of interesting. The name of the team was at first left up to Brown, who rejected calls for it to be christened the Browns in his honor. McBride then held a contest to name the team in May of 1945, which yielded the name Panthers, which had previously been used by an earlier team that had played in Cleveland in the 1920s. However, the nickname was scrapped soon afterward. And depending on the source that you listen to, there are two stories, right? Brown rejected it after learning that the Panthers had failed. And according to this version, Brown said, "That old Panthers team failed. I want no part of that name." Or the other story is McBride balked at paying the owner of the original Panthers for the rights to use the name. Whatever the case, in August, McBride gave in to popular demand and christened the team the Browns, despite Paul Brown's objections. Now, for years, Brown claimed that the second Name the Team contest yielded the name Brown Bombers after then World Heavyweight Boxing Champion Joe Louis, whose nickname was the Brown Bomber. Now, according to this version, when Brown rejected the nickname Panthers, he decided that the team needed a nickname befitting a champion and felt the nickname Brown Bombers was appropriate. The name was reportedly shortened to simply Browns. This alternate history of the name was even supported by the team as being factual as recently as the mid-1990s, and it continues as an urban legend to this day. However, Paul Brown never held fast to the Joe Louis story and later in his life admitted that it was false, invented to deflect unwanted attention arising from the team being named after him. The Browns and the NFL now both support the position that the team was indeed named after Paul Brown. With the roster fixed and the team's name chosen, Brown set out to build a dynasty. "I want to be what the New York Yankees are in baseball, or Ben Hogan is in golf," he said. The Browns played their first game in September of 1946 at Cleveland Stadium before a crowd of 60,135 people, and the team beat the Miami Seahawks 44-0 and set a then record attendance mark for professional football. That touched off a string of wins, and the team ended the season with a 12-2 record in the top spot in the AAFC's Western Division. They then went on to beat the New York Yankees in the championship. Cleveland won the AAFC championship again in 1947 behind an offensive attack that employed the forward pass more frequently and effectively than was typical at the time. The Browns' offensive success was driven by Brown's version of the T formation, which was gradually replacing the single wing formation as football's most popular and effective scheme. The Browns won every game in the 1948 season, a feat that went unmatched until the Miami Dolphins, coached by a Brown disciple of Don Shula, did it in 1972. Cleveland then won the AAFC championship for the fourth time in a row in 1949. By then, however, the league was struggling for survival, due in part to the Browns' dominance. Attendance at games dwindled in 1948 and 49 as fans lost interest in a lopsided victory, and at the end of the 1949 season, the AAFC dissolved. Three of its teams, the San Francisco 49ers, the Baltimore Colts, and the Browns, merged into the NFL. So the Browns' first game in the NFL was in 1950 against the two-time defending champion Philadelphia Eagles in Philadelphia. And they won the game 35-10, the first of 10 victories that year. After beating the New York Giants in a playoff game, the Browns went on to win the championship game against the Los Angeles Rams on a last-minute field goal by Groza. And the flag of the late lamented AAFC flies high, and Paul Brown has the last laugh, read the Plain Dealer's editorial page. In 16 seasons, Brown had led his team to 12 championships. He was the first head coach to win both a college and an NFL championship, a feat not repeated until Jimmy Johnson and later Barry Switzer did it with the Dallas Cowboys in the 1990s, and Pete Carroll, who accomplished the feat with USC in 2004 and the Seattle Seahawks in 2013. As the Browns climbed to the top of the NFL, speculation began to mount that Brown might return to the Buckeyes. He interviewed with the university's athletic board on January 27th of 1951, but the board unanimously rejected Brown in favor of Woody Hayes, who was unanimously endorsed by the Board of Trustees. The Browns reached the championship each of the next 3 years, but lost all of those games. In both 1952 and 53, Cleveland lost championships to the Detroit Lions, who were then on the rise after decades of mediocrity. Before the 1953 season, McBride sold the team to a group of local businessmen led by David Jones, for about $600,000. And while Brown was upset that McBride did not consult him about the deal, the new owners said they would stay out of the picture and let Brown run the team. Brown saw this as a crucial issue. He felt that he needed full control over personnel decisions and coaching to make his system work. Otto Graham announced in 1953 that the following season would be his last. But the team won the championship in 1954 in a rematch against the Lions, and Brown convinced Graham to come back. Cleveland finished 1955 with a 9-2-1 record, reaching the championship game again. The Browns beat the Rams for their second straight championship, and Graham retired after the season. With Graham gone and the quarterback situation in flux, the Browns ended 1956 with a 5-7 record, Paul Brown's first losing season as a professional coach. In the next year's draft, the team selected Jim Brown out of Syracuse University. As television began to help football leapfrog baseball as America's most popular sport, Jim Brown became larger-than-life personality. He was handsome and charismatic in private and dominant on the field. Paul Brown, however, was critical of some aspects of Jim Brown's game, including his disinclination to block. In Jim Brown's first season, the team reached a championship game, again against the Lions, but lost 59-14. The Browns did not contend for the championship in the following 2 years when a Baltimore Colts team, coached by Brown's former protege, Weeb Ewbank, won a pair of titles. Now, as Jim Brown's star rose, players began to question Paul Brown's leadership and play calling in the late 1950s. The skepticism came to a head in a game against the Giants at the end of the 1958 season, in which a win or tie would have given the Browns a spot in the championship game against Eubank's Colts. Now, in the third quarter, the Browns drove to New York's 16-yard line with a 10-3 lead and lined up for a field goal. But Coach Brown called a timeout before Groza could make the try, which alerted the Giants to a possible fake kick. Brown indeed called a fake, and the holder stumbled as he got up to throw, ruining the play. The Giants came back to win the game by a field goal, defeated the Browns in a 10-0 in a playoff for the Eastern Conference title, and reached the championship while the Browns went home without a spot in the title game for the second year in a row. Now, the players started losing faith in Coach Brown because of his autocratic style. Jim Brown started a weekly radio show, which Paul Brown did not like, as it undercut his control over the team and its message. But the coach found it hard to question Jim Brown given his feats on the field, and the tension between the two men grew. The team finished second in its division in 1959 and 1960, even as Jim Brown racked up league-leading seasons in rushing. Enter Art Modell, a New York advertising executive who bought the team in 1961 for $4.1 million. Now, Modell was only 35 years old at the time, and he bought out Brown's 15% stake in the team for $500,000 and gave Brown a new 8-year contract. He said he and Brown would have a working partnership and began to play a more direct role than previous owners in the team's operation. This angered Brown, who was used to having a free hand in football matters. Modell, who was single and only a few years older than most players, started to listen to their concerns about the coach. He became particularly close to Jim Brown, calling him my senior partner. Modell sat in the press box during games and could be overheard second-guessing Paul Brown's play calling, which drove a deeper wedge between the two men. At that time, Brown was the only coach who insisted on calling every offensive play, making use of rotating guards to ferry coaching instructions. Quarterback audibles to change the play at the line of scrimmage in response to defensive positioning were not permitted, and when Plum openly questioned Paul Brown's absolute control over play calling, he was traded to Detroit. Now, the conflict between Brown and Modell reached a breaking point when Brown traded star halfback Bobby Mitchell for the rights to Ernie Davis, a Heisman Trophy-winning running back who broke all of Jim Brown's rushing records at Syracuse. Paul Brown did not inform Modell of the move, and Modell only heard about it after getting a call from Washington Redskins owner George Preston Marshall. Davis, however, was diagnosed with leukemia before the 1962 season. He came to Cleveland to train after the cancer went into remission, but Brown would not allow him to play. Modell, however, wanted to give Davis a chance to play before he succumbed to the disease. Ultimately, the relationship between coach and owner was never repaired, and Ernie Davis never played in a professional game, dying on May 18th of 1963. As the rifts between the players and Brown and between Modell and Brown grew, Modell fired Brown on January 7th, 1963. Now, a controversy developed over the timing of the decision amid a local newspaper strike, which limited discussion of the move. A printing company executive, however, got together a group of sports writers and published a 32-page magazine fielding players' views on the firing. Opinions were mixed. Modell came in for his share of criticism, but tackle and team captain Mike McCormick said he did not think the team could win under Brown. Blanton Collier, Brown's longtime assistant, was named the team's new head coach. Brown remained with the team as vice president and continued to receive an $82,000 salary under his 8-year contract, though the position had no true power, and what he told the New York Times was a vice president in charge of I don't know what. Brown reportedly wished to purchase the Eagles, who were put on sale by the Happy 100 on April 19th, and he led a group of investors that offered $4.5 million. Modell supported his efforts, regardless of their dispute, telling the Associated Press that he would not stand in Brown's way if he wants to buy the Eagles. Now, despite his success in Cleveland, the news drew mixed reaction from Philadelphians, as opponents saw little reason to replace the current front office or were hesitant to see an outsider owning their team. By May, however, Brown had lost interest in the bid, and an article from the Plain Dealer claimed that remains doubtful whether Brown ever seriously considered purchasing the Eagles, and that no attempt was made to put together a group, and he hasn't visited Philadelphia since the Browns took a licking there last fall. Out of football for the first time since 1930, Brown spent the next 5 years away from the sidelines, never once attending a Browns contest. As the team's vice president, he spoke little to Modell, only briefly doing so in 1963 to discuss some scouting. Modell explained in 1964 that he did not order Brown to carry out any major responsibilities, as it would have been ludicrous to give a man of his stature piddling assignments. While he was secure financially, Brown's frustration grew with each passing year. It was terrible, he later recalled. I had everything a man could want: leisure, enough money, a wonderful family. Yet with all that, I was eating my heart out. Because Brown was still receiving his annual salary and liked to play golf, it was said that the only two people who made more money playing golf were Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus. Brown explored coaching possibilities, but he was mindful not to put himself in a position where his control might be challenged as it had been in Cleveland. In 1963, the New York Titans of the American Football League offered him the head coach job for $50,000 but failed. 4 years later, the AFL, which had formed to compete against the NFL, put a new franchise in Cincinnati. Brown had the third largest stake in the team and was the front man for the ownership group. He became general manager and head coach and was also given the right to represent the team in all league matters, a key element of control for him. He called his new franchise the Bengals because Cincinnati had a team of that name in the 1930s, and he thought it would provide a link to the past. Brown's son Mike joined the front office and became his father's top assistant and right-hand man. Brown brought in other assistants, including Bill Johnson, Rick Farzano, and Bill Walsh. In their first two seasons in 1968 and 69, the Bengals fared poorly, but the team appeared to be on the upswing as Brown built up a core group of players through the draft, including quarterback Greg Cook. The Bengals entered the NFL in 1970 as a result of the AFL-NFL merger and were placed in the newly formed American Football Conference alongside the Browns. A career-ending injury to Cook before the 1970 season forced the Bengals to rely on Virgil Carter, an emergency backup who could make accurate short passes but could not throw the ball deep like Cook once could. Brown and Walsh went to work designing an offense around Carter's limitations, a scheme that was the genesis of the West Coast offense that Walsh would later use to great effect when he became the coach of the San Francisco 49ers. As the Bengals head coach, Brown took the team to the playoffs 3 times, including 1970. Despite finding a franchise quarterback in Ken Anderson, Brown's team never got past the first round of the postseason tournament. 4 days after the Bengals were eliminated from the playoffs in 1975, Brown announced he was retiring after 45 years of coaching. The game had changed dramatically during his time in the NFL, growing from America's second sport to the country's biggest and most lucrative pastime. Brown was 67 years old. Brown is credited with a number of American football innovations. He was the first coach to use game film to scout opponents, hire a full-time staff of assistants, test players on their knowledge of the playbook, and he also invented the modern face mask, the practice squad, and the draw play. He also played a major role in breaking professional football's color barrier, bringing the first African Americans to play pro football in the modern era onto his teams. Despite these accomplishments, Brown was not universally liked. He was strict and controlling, which often brought him into conflict with players who wanted a greater say in play calling. Okay, that wraps up our spotlight on Paul Brown, the innovator, and another great figure of the NFL past. Man, how astounding is it to think that one man was responsible for creating playbooks or implementing face masks, creating the taxi squad, scouting game film, hiring full-time staff, drawing up the draw play, having coaches call plays, putting coaches in the press box with a phone down to the field, and putting a transmitter into the QB's helmet a full 30 or 40 years before it would become common practice. Just incredible. Now, which innovation was the most surprising to you or just your favorite? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. All right, thanks for joining me for today's trip into the past. Join me again next week as we continue our review of the Hall of Fame class of 1967. As always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell a friend. Now stay safe, and I'll see you next time.